Paul. Well, let's see. It's been probably maybe 3 or 4 years since we've done the last videos together, right? And so this is our first shoot since then. And I guess I was driving down here and we were both contemplating some things that we should talk about because it's been quite a while since we've had a sit down. And I guess we had two questions from sort of two different angles, but they're pretty, there's some similarities there. Yours was, what does it mean to be enlightened? Or, no, what does it mean to be awake? And is enlightenment real?
Yeah, is enlightenment real?
Is enlightenment real?
And you were saying, what does it mean to be awake? Now, do we dare ask those questions? You know, I mean, wow.
Well, I think we're gonna.
Yeah, we're gonna do it, but I don't know. We both don't know where this is going to go.
Yeah, of course.
You know, so it should be interesting. I mean, where do you even start, George?
Yeah, where do you start? Well, what got you interested in that question? What does it mean? What is enlightenment real? Is there something that kind of got that question going for you?
Not particularly.
Okay.
But, I mean, we could say, yeah, enlightenment's real. But
it's not a yes or no question, is it?
Right. No, but what good's that going to do? Right? Yeah. I mean, people could believe us, or they don't have to believe us. It's.
Well, what is enlightenment real to? I guess. What is
who is it real to, or
who?
What's the question?
Who is it real to? I guess the question is what that I'm asking is, in terms of enlightenment, what is that phrase, enlightenment, or that term, being, what does it become real to?
Yeah, in other words, are you asking who's hearing that?
Yeah, who's hearing that?
Not necessarily, is it Paul or Kevin or Jake but what is it in people that is hearing that?
Right.
That's what you mean, right?
Right. You know, who does it become real to? Who's hearing that?
Yeah,
question?
And that's an immensity itself to go into.
And we have to hear it through ourselves too, right? So what does that mean to each of us? So
right.
I guess when we start to tease apart that question, we've got to find a good entry point into that. And what does it mean to be awake is the other question we were thinking about. So maybe there's other approaches to get into this to kind of come back into is enlightenment real or not?
Okay, so your question is like, what or who is hearing this? And generally, most people have an image of themselves as the one who is doing the thinking, that they're a thinker, that they have awareness, they have intelligence, they're in control of their thoughts, they have an identity that thinks of themselves as Christian or Muslim or an American or a Russian or... So there's an identity there, an ego, something that feels like it has control over different things, makes choices, has free will, if you will. And I think that's what's, at least that's what thinks it's looking into this and asking the questions about, is enlightenment real? What does it mean to wake up? So this identity is what is trying to assess this, right?
Yeah.
And the problem might be that it thinks it has the capability of managing this. I mean, it's the only thing that's available, it seems. So I'm stuck there now.
Well, I mean, maybe there's another way to think about it, is that, you know, we think that enlightenment is a step from one transition to another. Whatever pre-enlightenment was, then there's enlightenment. There's some other step or stage. Mm-hmm. And maybe another way to think about it is that enlightenment is already the baseline state. And that the part that you're talking about, the part that says it wants to achieve, to get to, even then question whether enlightenment is real or not, is the very thing that is in the way of, you can call it whatever at that point. You don't have to say it's enlightenment, but whatever is in the way of kind of that basis of awareness that's not in control of that awareness that we're talking about. Everything else is in trying to control that type of awareness, but maybe that's the very thing that is the prevention to that awareness of what people call enlightenment. And I guess the question is that even real? Is that thing that I'm talking about now, that is this baseline awake state, is that real?
Yep.
Because whatever tries to attempt to achieve, to gain, to get that, already then is saying that it's separate from that awareness, separate from that enlightened state, separate from that consciousness, whatever terms you'd like to use to describe that. Something that says, I want to get that, well, it already has set itself up as being separate from that, right?
Right.
But I guess if you look at it as enlightenment as some further step along the journey, you know, it's like you start here and then you get to there, well, then that already is implying that separation,
right,
to get from there to there. So it's either enlightenment exists all through it all, you know, even the self that's trying to get it, or it's all fabricated by the personalized consciousness, I guess, or the individualized separate consciousness.
Right. This is here's a metaphor. The self, the thinker, is like a beetle, you know, and this little shiny beetle crawling around. And the beetle doesn't realize its full potential. It's newly born, just coming into life. It doesn't understand that it has wings. It doesn't know it has wings. It can imagine it, it can think about it, but it actually has to realize it has wings. It has to realize it. Once it realizes it has wings and comes back with the other beetles, and it sees the other beetles and they don't know they have wings. They don't know their full potential, right? But they're already
have wings.
They already have their full potential. And to try to communicate to them and try to describe it, and the other beetles might want to do meditation. They might learn to levitate and everything, but they still have to realize they have wings. And when they realize they have wings and they take off and they realize their full potential, they're still a beetle. Mm. Mm-hmm. And the full potential was there all the time. Mm.
That's a good metaphor. That's working. So then I guess you're pointing out then is like, then what are the blocks to that full potential within the beetles that don't recognize that they already have wings?
So the beetles have an idea, they just born, they have this idea of who they are. They have an image of who they are. They're this little round, shiny animal with lots of little legs, and they crawl around. They have this image. Mm-hmm. And that image is not the whole thing. It doesn't grasp the full potential. It's leaving something out. There's so much that it doesn't see or understand, and it's incapable of making the transition. There's something else, which we call realization or enlightenment or awakening, that releases that full potential. Mm-hmm. But it's already implicit in the beetle. It's already there.
Yeah, that's the important distinction that we're talking about there, is that it's not some other state that's achieved that isn't already existing already within.
Right. And that's what you were trying to get at, right?
Right.
Yeah. So let's go see if we can go directly into this. Maybe this is going too fast, but that's what's coming up, and it's just flowing. So let's try to take a really quick look at this image. Uh-huh. What's creating the image? What is this image we have that's holding us back from our full potential? And we've done this in our other videos, mm-hmm. which is on, so people know, it's on Mindful Trackers. They can look up, is that what they can look
Mindful
up?
Tracker.
Mindful Trackers on YouTube.
On YouTube, yeah. And
we combine those videos a lot with animal tracking, which you and I have taught for years. And, mm-hmm. Nature, becoming intimate with nature and all that. So we talked about this. We talked about how if we go back and look at maybe a trigger that initiated this sense of separateness from thought, the sense that there is a thinker controlling thought, that there is an entity within that is separate from the feelings and has feelings, that has awareness. And there was one thought that we mentioned that seemed to be really important, and it probably went something like this. Those are my thoughts. Mm-hmm. Whew. Man, that's just one thought.
Right.
But the implications of that and believing that are tremendous. Mm. And it's captured the mind of humanity through thousands and thousands of years. And we can see it playing itself out now in the world as divisions in religion, various authoritarian belief systems, at war with each other, threatening each other, lots of fear and pain and human suffering. That one thought, those are my thoughts, created the sense of someone who is thinking the thoughts. Thought was creating this idea that there was an entity separate from the thoughts that was creating the thoughts. And we bought it. We bought it hook, line, and sinker. And that identity now, I mean, people don't have relationships anymore. It's the identities that have relationships. You know, you support my identity, I'll support yours, and we're friends. Right? You threaten my identity, and I might punch you in the mouth. Right? Oh, what a world.
No,
so here we are with...
Yeah, there was because I remember that in one of those videos, we got to this point in the conversation where I was really asking, like, well, what is that entity? What is that conglomeration of thoughts? You know, the one thought that came in, and then you said something like, "Oh, wait a second, hold on. Is there anything even real there? You know, is there anything even real there?" So we started off this conversation asking if enlightenment is real, but maybe the question though we should really be asking is that one thought that you're talking about that has created this identity, is that real? You know,
yeah.
is that entity that's created all the thoughts and made this big structure of self and organizational structures that expand out from that, is that real?
Right.
You know,
now the thought itself, right? It was a real thought in itself, right? But the whole idea of something that is thinking the thought, is there somebody actually thinking the thought, or is that just an assumption? Right, that's what you're asking, right?
Yes, is that real? Because, you know, the thought is a real part of the real thought stream, but then you have this one thought that continues to compound on itself over and over itself that creates this identity, which then has removed itself from the flow of thought,
right.
And says, like you say, these are my thoughts. And
right.
It's now separate from those, the controlling of those thoughts. You know, you like this, you dislike this, you categorize everything, judgments. It all expounds out from that.
Right. And that is what's listening, what we pointed to when we were saying in the beginning, what's listening, what's asking the question, what's trying to get the answer. Is enlightenment real? What is awakening all about? So it's that entity that's trying to assess this. And that entity might not even be real, and it may be totally incapable of assessing this and understanding what enlightenment is or isn't, or what awakening is about.
Well, maybe it's like this. Maybe the discovery of whether that separate self is real or not isn't in itself discovering whether enlightenment is real or not. Meaning that the two are somehow interrelated. You know, because the entity itself, the separate self that you're describing, can never discover whether enlightenment is real or not. How could that part discover?
Well, how could something that's not real...
Right. That's what I'm saying. How could it discover that?
Right.
So in itself, discovering it about in the discovery that it's not, the thing that's trying to discover is not real, might actually be the thing that catapults the discovery of what is real.
Right. There might be something that could happen there.
Yeah.
Right. So, the question of maybe we can jump right into this, you know, maybe we don't have to do a long discussion here. So, what is awakening about? So, if this entity that believes it has awareness, it believes that it has free will, it has choice, if there's clarity about that's not real. If there's real clarity about that, then something dramatically, there's a dramatic change in the human being. Mm-hmm. If that falls away as a controlling agent, and there's an awakening to the fact that that's not real, that is not what is aware, but that entity is arising in awareness. The falseness of that entity is arising in awareness. There's an awakening to the false nature of self, but there's also an awakening to the fact that there's something there that is revealing the whole thing. Mm-hmm. That the self had nothing to do with. But all of a sudden, everything is coherent. It's clear that all this free will that I had, all this, the idea that I had control over my thought process, the idea that I was a Catholic or a Muslim, just falls away. It's all false. The ability that doesn't have the ability to see or be clear is made clear by clarity itself. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden there's a realization you can't deny awareness, you can't deny clarity. It's just there revealing everything. So now we might be able to point to what awakening is about in its most fundamental nature. And before awakening, there was the identity. Right? It's running our lives. We can see what it's causing in the world as it expresses itself outwardly, and attachments to different ideological principles and how those go to war with each other. When that falls away, through awareness coming in and revealing all that, the person's energy is no longer attached to that type of imagery, is no longer chained, bound to those authoritarian principles, is no longer caught up in the fear and separation that those identities cause. but is set free by this awareness that just simply is revealing the truth. Now the person's energy is more in the awareness, more in that openness. It's like an open door.
And I think another way to sort of summarize and describe some of what you were discussing there is everything that entity that you're talking about that is about control and security for itself. All those things that it thought were giving security to itself aren't security. There's no real security within those. They're all, based on fear, avoidance of things, and there's now this discovery of where, let's say, real security lies.
Yeah.
Which is not in what's it's trying to control all these factors on itself. And that openness that you're describing presents the real opportunity for real security.
So there's in this openness, there's a big release, a letting go, a relaxation, a peace.
Mm-hmm.
Like I grew up as thinking of myself as a macho kid, a Catholic, an American.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's what brought security, like you were saying, right? That's what brought security. But it also could be threatened by another thought system, another belief system. It could be threatened by another nation. So there's fear in that. And there's conflict. And you can see it continuously playing itself out in the world. But now, as you're pointing out, security, the energy that was seeking security in that way, is now finds security in just simple openness and awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And the entity that was, had this identity we talked about, I'll pat you on the back and you pat me on the back, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just appease your identity, you appease mine. And now we can meet directly without that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to appease any identity in you. You don't have to appease an identity in me. We just meet directly at you as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
It's not dependent on ego structures.
That's a very different way of relating.
Right.
Right. Think of the types of problems that can be solved with that type of awareness showing up.
Right. So we're not attached. So say we have an idea to how to solve an environmental problem. Say we have an environmental problem and we have several people getting together to solve that problem. And they all have different ideas. Mm-hmm. And they're all attached, though, because they have identities and they're their ideas. They're attached to those ideas. And you just have, people that can't give up their ideas, even if somebody else has a better one. And it's very difficult. You can't solve problems because you got too many ego problems.
Yeah.
Okay, but if there's no attachment to those ideas, then people can meet in openness. Then all the different ideas become not a threat, but an asset. The more people we have with different ideas, the better. We can assess them all, pull them all together. We can solve problems now instead of being at each other's throats, right?
Right.
So we're trying to address what it means to be awake, means openness, and what it means to be what we call asleep.
Yeah, sure.
Means to be attached to an image.
And then, so why is it? Why do you think it's so difficult for that image to release?
Well, that okay.
You know, I mean,
the same thought was coming up in my head, George.
Yeah.
Okay, so now maybe what we said are saying sounds good to some people, and so right away the thought process says, okay, I'm going to get rid of self.
Well, I mean, you suggest like, okay, I show up at a meeting, we're solving an environmental problem, and I've got my ideas about how I'd like to see things go, and I just listen to our video, and I'll show up and I'll try to be more open. But deep down inside, I'm feeling like I'd really like my idea to go through. You know, there's still some attachment, even though I've just listened to this video and have some things to think about. I'm going to try and restrain myself in that way to hear other people's opinions, yet still deep down, I feel like I'm going to nudge this in the direction to get my angle in on there.
Yep.
So there's like a real effort to try, you know, someone sitting there with in effort trying to make that happen. And there's what we're suggesting here probably is there's not much of there can be a way of this that is no effort within that interplay of ideas. It's not that someone's trying to now control because now there's some awareness around types of things we're discussing that there isn't a control that comes in to then have to try and limit itself to how it's going to play itself out.
Right, and you're pointing to a lot of wasted energy.
Right.
That's going nowhere, really, except protecting itself. Interest.
Right, so there's wasted energy in that little play, that little game that can happen there. So then, I guess the question that I asked before is, why is it so difficult then for that complete transition that you're talking about into that openness where none of the game playing is actually part of the transition process? Because the game playing is more or less the same controlling entity that now it's controlling itself in what it sees as positive ways rather than blind negative ways that it was acting before.
Right. It set up another authoritarian principle to live by, and doesn't realize it's doing it because awareness is pushed out of the way in the name of that which still is trying to have control.
Yes.
So it's every time that self, every time the will makes an effort to improve or even get out of the way, or it just rings its own bell.
Right.
And the harder it tries, the louder the bell rings.
Mm-hmm.
But it just can't seem, and it can't see itself.
It's just a big dilemma there then.
Right. Intellectually, it might even get it, but then, oh, I get it. Mm-hmm. You see, it just rang its own bell again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's stuck.
Mm-hmm.
It's really stuck. And it's not even its own fault. It's just programmed that way. And it's on automatic.
Right.
So, waking up so-called, and I think enlightenment is deeper than that, but maybe we could go into that later. But waking up is waking up to that dilemma from a place, quotation marks around that's not really a place or a thing, but it's waking up to that whole thing from outside, sort of. Mm-hmm. Again, there's no way to articulate that properly because we're not talking about space and time.
Yeah, well, maybe outside of the normal mode of consciousness that's been streaming through, the device of consciousness, outside of that loop, let's say.
Yeah.
So it's not something outside of it's not outside of the body. It's not outside of what's going on internally or externally.
Like the beetle with wings.
Right, with the beetle with wings. So it's outside of that loop of the kind of dualist, the fragmented consciousness that's been operating. You know, maybe
right.
That's a better way to describe it.
Yep, I think that. So now the self wants to trigger that. Now the self wants that to happen.
Yeah.
It wants awakening. It wants enlightenment. And you see it just ringing its bell again. It can't stop ringing its bell. And it seems like all one can do is point to that. If you try to point to the awareness, you're pointing at nothing. Mm. It doesn't know that. It doesn't have control over that. It can't make it happen.
Well, maybe this bell analogy, there's something to it, because maybe some, we never really like to talk about some sort of stages of awakening, or at least, we look at some clear thing. But maybe this bell ring you're talking about starts off as like, boom, oh, there it is. There's some awareness now around this loop, like a little wrench gets thrown in the loop. It's like, whoa, what was that? Right? I just saw something about myself relating in this group meeting that I hadn't quite seen before in a way,
Right.
And the bell keeps getting rung louder and louder and louder until it's like something then something potentially shifts. I know this is talking kind of some sort of a gradual approach to this, but when the operating system's been going for so long in a particular direction, either that bell's hit so hard that there's an instant flip-flop out of that, or there's continually little points along the way that continue to get a little louder and louder that are informing that thought structure that's separate, keeps informing itself.
Right, awareness is there. Yeah. And you can see awareness working in people. They don't see it working in them, but you can see, like, people have little ahas, just like you're trying to describe. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, like you're saying, all of a sudden they see something about themselves they never saw before. And that's awareness at work, revealing aspects of ourselves we never seen before. And when that happens, sometimes people miss it, but when that happens, there can be the realization that you didn't have anything to do with that. Mm-hmm. It was just there. Mm-hmm. Wow, look at that. It was a gift, right? But what happens when people get those little gifts and awareness comes in and does its thing is they steal it. They go,
I discovered that.
Yeah, I got to do that more often, So the ego grabs a hold of it, and we're stuck.
Right.
But but can we see that? Can we be free of that?
Right. Well, then the bell's
And
getting
what's
hit a lot.
freeing us of that, right?
Right. Well, then that's more of the transition of being more of that than the thing that thinks it's doing the controlling of that. You know, it seems
Right.
like
Right.
that awareness is presence. You know, that presence is residing here now.
Right. Yes.
And that's and no one's controlling that.
Right. So, what you're describing there seems to be the fact of openness, awareness, revealing. But the important thing is that there's an understanding implicit in that awareness and openness is a fact, moving, revealing, constantly there. Things are just coming and going in that. The ego's coming and going in that. Spiritual experiences are coming and going in that. And that is continuously revealing, being, bringing coherence to the whole movement of thought, the whole movement of self, the trap we're in, all that.
Mm-hmm.
So then when the person realizes the fact of openness and awareness, doing this revealing, there is the fact of no self and the fact of being.
Mm-hmm.
So who am I at that point? I could re-identify with and say, oh, I'm the awareness. I'm not the thought, I'm not the body, I'm the essence here is openness and awareness. It's a fact. It's not coming and going, it's a constant. All form is coming and going. There's the formless, that's the constant, that's my essence. But I think there's a deeper realization that form is formless and formless is form.
Mm-hmm.
To quote a Buddhist thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm all that moving. I'm all that in the dance of life.
Mm.
I'm not one, I'm not the other, it's not separate. It's all moving as one. There's no separation there.
Yeah, there's not two facts, like you said before there.
And there's an understanding and coherence there that is understood from the openness and awareness moving together with form. It's not separate.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at other people, I realize that that's who they are. They're that potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're all that potential. We're just living, most of us just living the dream of being a Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, an American.
Right.
So much more than that.
So then I guess then is, you know, if someone listens to this, it's we've often asked the question of, well, then now what? Right? If I am all that and I can understand those things through your words, the question would be, well, what is the direct realization that someone would have to know that, other than if they are already that? Then some people will say, well, there's nothing to do then. And if there's nothing to do and someone sees the continual same patterns continue to show up in their life, even though there might be nothing to do, and everything they tried to do is now counterproductive to just being, this is that location where it's difficult for the kind of operating system that's been working one way for so long to realize it, let's say, fully realize its full potential in the way that you're describing. Although it should be rather simple. It shouldn't be a complex adjustment.
Yeah, if I understand, I might have lost you there a little bit, George, but if I understand you correctly, is the self, the so-called thinker who believes in itself as real, it's incapable. Mm-hmm. Right? You can't understand this anyways. So what are you saying about?
Well, I'm just pointing out that you're at a point where the simplicity of it sounds so simple and easy, mm-hmm. yet the actual direct realization for someone, it seems very complex and difficult to say, okay, I can realize my full potential, yet the same patterns continue to play out in their lives, which is the divisive mechanisms that have been playing out for a long time, are in place that continue to prevent this openness and awareness from being who they really are.
Okay.
Do you follow what I'm saying there?
I think so. Let me just say this and see if I'm following you correctly. Right, say a person has this awakening. There's clarity that there's the fact of openness and awareness, the formless moving with form, the fact of the false self. Right, so there's a seeing all this, there's a clarity about this. But that doesn't mean that the false self and all its attachments and all its emotions, it's just wiped out. Mm-hmm. It's not just completely wiped out at that point. End of story. That's written in the tissue of the brain. It's in the cellular structure of the brain. Part of the brain is got these habitual patterns, and certain buttons are pushed, and those patterns, even if a person's awake to all the falseness and the fact of awareness, even if a person is awake to that, those habitual structures will still move. Mm-hmm. They will still, the head will still rise. When that happens, say anger comes in. You're awake now, you should be above that, you think. Right? Mm-hmm. That's more self, right? Self-thinking, it's awake. When there's been a lot of clarity, and then anger comes in. All of a sudden, somebody pushes the button and you find that you're angry. If a person's really awake when that comes in, and if there's real clarity when that comes in, there's the realization that there's nobody there to do anything about the anger. There's no separate something from the anger and it's not that the anger shouldn't be there. That's just more anger. There's clarity about that. So there's just openness to the anger. There's even like an embracing the anger. It's just what it is. It's just a habit of the mind expressing itself, and you greet it not from a separate place, but it comes in, moves, and goes into the abyss. Mm-hmm. Right. So is that so? Now,
yeah.
There's there's something called embodiment now, right?
Yes.
And I think that's what people are talking about when they talk about embodiment. Because as a person's energy rests in openness or awakeness rather than ego-ness, those patterns of ego just flow through. They just keep, there's no attachment to them. There's no effort to do anything with them as the person resides in this awake state. And that those muscles, that tissue in the brain, will exhaust itself eventually, depending on how conditioned the person is, depending on how much trauma they've had in their life. All that stuff has to, and for some people, if they had real trauma, it may never completely work its way out. Mm-hmm. But for some people, that will atrophy. Mm-hmm. Then to me, that's what enlightenment is, or the embodiment of awakeness. Then the person is hardly ever feels, doesn't mean they won't ever, there's no telling, but the person hardly ever feels anger or envy or fear, psychological fear. There could be physical fear. Those things atrophy. And the person's life is really changed in that respect.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing is that they didn't do it the way they thought they would.
Right. There's no one accomplished that.
Right.
No one arrived. Mm-hmm. No one is enlightened. Mm-hmm. There's just awareness. Mm. A formless moving with form. There's just what is arising.
Well, then I guess, we can talk about enlightenment as also not just an end static state either, because it's continually integrating and moving with everything else, right?
Yeah, it's open.
If you show up and say, I've enlightened, and then you're stuck there, then right. The next thing that comes along, if it's not integrating, adapting, moving with the energy that's moving through, held on to the enlightenment thought, well, then it's now just stuck back over here.
Right.
And,
right, John.
Yeah, so then there isn't an end point either to what we're calling enlightenment or being awake.
Right. I think that what we could say is that in the dream state, there's just a habitual kind of movement. It's a blind movement. It's a very mechanical movement. When a person wakes up, that's when learning really begins. Mm-hmm. And the person continues to learn.
Right.